IMO, which is short for indigenous microorganisms. Natural farming, which IMO is part of natural farming, Korean natural farming to be specific, but we kind of call it natural farming just so that it's universal. And I'll talk a little bit about establishing a new grow space. So how you can set up something in your yard in just a couple months. So, all right. So I've been growing and studying plants and fungi for the last 14 years now. In the process of studying cannabis, I discovered the methodology of dragonfly earth medicine and natural farming, and I dove in head first, knowing it was a way to help plants express themselves to their full potential. Once I got a feel for natural farming, I felt compelled to share it with people, and I formed a small company called Conscious Natural Inputs. Everything is small batch. It's run by me, and I have a buddy that helps me once a week, like upkeep the farm and upkeep these things. And it's aimed at initiating people into a regenerative, healthy, and interactive experience with their food and medicine. These are my teachers, really. I didn't get to learn directly from Master Cho, but I've learned a lot from this guy named Chris Trump. He has a lot of useful information on YouTube. If you just look up Chris Trump, Korean Natural Farming, you'll find a plethora of things.
What is his last name?
Trump.
Oh.
Yep.
Spelled the same way?
Exactly the same. Not related as far as I know, but yes. But yes, he learned from Master Cho Han-kyu from Korea, and he came up with Korean natural farming. I mean, it's an extension of natural farming that comes from Japan, but he really like nailed down a lot of like the nitpicky things to kind of create a symphony out of all the inputs and microbes, and it's very thought out. So here we are at an in-person class that was in Idaho, and we went out to search for fungi like mycelium that you can find at the base of some trees or just different areas of the forest. I'm planning on taking a walk for anyone that wants to come along after I'm done talking, and we'll look for spots like that. And then right here is a pile of IMO. This is actually IMO 3. It's like a boutique compost is really all it is. And then if any of you are familiar with mushroom cultivation, it's really the same thing as that too. So like you build a substrate, you get it to field capacity with the moisture. In this case, there's inputs or different plant foods and things like that, and plant medicine involved in that. And then you babysit this thing. So I'll talk a bit about that. But that's how we expand the microbes that we gather from the forest into our garden and marry them with the ones that are in our soil and create more soil intelligence. So love and intention is a huge part of natural farming. If any of you have grown plants, maybe you've seen it yourself, the more love that you have for them, it's not just the attention that you're giving them and making sure there's not bugs on them. There's an actual exchange of love energy with the plants. And that needs to go into everything that you make within natural farming too, because those are all going to get applied to your plants. So it's this buildup of intention and energy, and it's obvious whenever you are applying it to them and seeing what it does. So the natural farmer first has to farm themselves. That's a great quote that I learned from Chris, and he learned from his teacher. So some people can get into this and really enjoy the diversity of all the different things you can make and at what rates to apply them at different times, and you can get really nerded out on it. And you can make your plants look nice too, but if you're not actually taking care of yourself first, then you can only do so much. So this is just a little encouragement to not dive too far into this if you're not giving yourself enough attention first. So IMO, indigenous microorganisms. So natural farming itself is 80% IMO, 20% inputs. A lot of the people like to get into making the different plant foods and different inputs that you can do. Um, but if it's lacking the IMO part, like the compost, the forest collection that I'll talk about, then you're really only doing 20% of it. So you're better off just going with IMO and forgetting the rest if you want. So IMOs are essentially soil intelligence. They are evolved, adapted survivors that have the ability to transform your soil and fight off pests and diseases. So we collect, concentrate, and expand them into substrate akin to composting. We then combine that fully grown out substrate with local soil at a 50-50 rate by like space, diameter, height. I mean, it's not necessarily by weight when it comes to certain things like that. And repeat the meticulous composting process. Simply put, it's a fungal dominant farming. It is fungal dominant farming utilizing local ancient fungal intelligence. Inputs are icing on the cake that can allow you to maximize yields and flavor. They can also offer a certain amount of plant steering to the farmer. You can go to the next one. So an IMO collection, that's what I was talking about, taking some of the fungi out of the forest. So it's the process of collecting indigenous microorganisms from a thriving forest or environment near your growing area. So this could be within, I mean, the closer the better. So if you have a forest in your backyard or a forest that's like 5 miles away or something, that would be great. The more untouched, the better too. You want to find an area that's thriving on its own, has no human interaction. I mean, if it's nearby a trail or something, that can still be good. But yeah, the idea is capturing the intelligence that's allowing the forest to just thrive on its own. Like, look how green it is. It does its own thing. There's no need for fertilizer of any kind to ever go in there. So there's got to be, the reasons for that are the microorganisms and the microbes and the soil bugs, to put it simply. Focus on areas that have minimal human activity and visible mycelium in the soil and decomposing organic matter. Use a slotted cedar box or a woven box of natural material with a breathable lid to do the collection. And it's done with rice. So slightly undercooked, short grain white rice is the way to go. So it's like al dente. Oh, yes.
Sorry, when you're looking at an area to collect, there's like the amount of millimeters of plants factor in, because there are a lot of areas near my home that are like thriving well on their own, but there's tons of just non-native species.
Invasive things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily go, I wouldn't worry about that because you're just trying to bring up like the soil microbes. You're not going to take any of the invasive thing and then reintroduce that. So if anything, yeah, maybe the microbes would be slightly altered than they would be in their completely native state because of interaction with certain plants. But if they're specific to that, they would end up dying off whenever you transfer it to your nearby area because they wouldn't have that to attach to. So yeah, I wouldn't feel limited by that. Yeah. Um, Again, it's undercooked rice, so it's kind of like al dente. And you fill your container up 2/3 full. You put and you cover it with like so if you're using a cedar box like this, you would cover it with paper towels on the top, not touching the rice, but across the top tight, and then maybe put like a screen of some kind to keep animals out. And you put that directly against active soil with leaf litter on top of it and around it. You kind of cover it up. You can go even further and like put some type of cage or something, because if it's really out in the woods, then like raccoons and all sorts of things want to eat the rice. Everything wants to eat the rice. Yeah, so full takeover of the rice typically takes between 3 to 6 days. It can take way longer depending on your environment. So there's a certain amount of luck with getting a collection like this, and there is significant failure rate. So you have to kind of know that going into it. But yeah, so a successful IMO looks like white cotton candy and smells like rich forest floor. So if you've ever like dug back some leaves and you smell that super rich, yeah, forest smell. I don't even know what else to call that. It's awesome. And it should smell just like that, but not look anything like soil. So that's a great indicator. Um, Unsuccessful IMO is typically colorful, and I'll show some examples of that because there's a bunch of bacteria in there making all sorts of colors, and it smells sour or it can smell like garbage. It, it's we go by smell almost more than visual with a lot of the natural farming stuff. So um, yeah, make IMO2 within 15 minutes of a successful collection, if possible. I mean, if it's a couple hours later, that's great too. But there's a lot of optimization within this type of stuff that if you can get close, it might be even better. Yeah,
How big were those crates?
something like this. Yeah, not very big. Maybe like yeah, 8 or 10 inch square. I mean, you could use like a wicker basket too. Yeah, anything that's like natural and breathable like that. The cedar will hold up to like repeated collections without getting eaten into by the fungus. So it's like got antimicrobial properties, just the wood itself. So yeah, optimal conditions for IMO while you're doing the collection, and then later after you like while you're making the pile, and after you put it out in your garden. You're trying to stick to this the whole time, really. They like 70% shade and 30% sunlight. So if they are in 100% sunlight, you're going to blast the microbes away, basically. So you shoot for that, and you can achieve that out in the garden with like mulch of different kinds. The 2/3 rule. So you may have heard me mention that when you're filling the rice up in the container, 2/3 full, you leave the top third. That's to make room for the microbes to dance and interplay basically in that space, and they heat it up slightly and they keep it at a perfect temp on their own in order to make more of them. So we're shooting for that with IMO. That also applies to LAB, which is a lactic acid bacteria concoction. FPJ, fermented plant juice. Fermented fruit juice is FFJ, and then FAA is a fish amino acid. So it's a fermented fish nitrogen rich input. And the same rule applies to the preparation of all those for the same reasons. Really, you're trying to give them space to create heat if they need to, or just be able to breathe the way that they need to at the top to replicate. Okay, these are successful. This is a good IMO collection. It's only black up there from sporulation. So this is the same as this cotton candy stuff. It just sat a little bit longer, or is a little further along. This is another close up of the spores coming off of that as it's starting to dry out a little bit. And then this is a maybe keepable, but you'd want to use this in addition to like some other successful ones when you go to make a pile. But that's nearing on not a good collection. There's a bunch of trichoderma in it, which is kind of a grayish green color. There's reds in there. There's yellows. Yeah, and it smelled okay, but it's not as good as when you do it like that. So you can keep things of varying quality. It's just I wouldn't spend all the time and energy and focus on making a pile if that's the only collection you have. Optimally, you can get like 4 or 5 collections from different areas around your farm or your house or wherever you want to grow, and you could even go further and take those at the different times of the year and at different elevations. So we're trying to catch a huge amount of microbes from around the area that can survive in different conditions, and then get them to marry the ones at your grow spot, and then basically the best always stick around. IMO2 is mixing that collection that we're talking about. So you get a good one in the rice and you mix that 50-50 with brown sugar, and that's by weight. And that's what you should try to do as soon as possible after you find that you have a good collection. So what the sugar does is it pulls the moisture out and causes everything to sporulate and go dormant. Use a scale and clean hands, and you gently massage the collection with brown sugar. You don't like bust into it or use a spoon or anything. You're gentle with it. Then fill a jar up 2/3 full and cap with a breathable lid, like a paper towel and a rubber band. Or if you're using mason jars, you can just use the metal band to seal in a paper towel. Then you should label it with the grade that you think it's at, out of like perfect to colorful and terrible. And store it in a cool, dark place for 3+ years. So I'm not sure how far the plus extends out, but it lasts a long time. I wouldn't say fridge for this one, but just like somewhere in a basement or in a dark closet that doesn't get too hot would be good. So this is the most valuable input out of the ones that I'll talk about, because this is just a raw collection that's put to sleep. So you could stop here and you could just get a collection like that and add it to your water that you're going to water into your soil or your bed or whatever you want to do, and you would see results with just this. But I'll explain how to actually take this little bit and expand it into a whole pile, where the whole pile then sporulates, and then you dust it everywhere so it goes way further. So the goal is 6 to 9 collections from spring, summer, and fall over the course of 2 or 3 years. And varied elevation is good too. So yeah, we're just collecting diverse and adaptable microbial intelligence. IMO3 is the pile that I keep talking about. So that's that collection that we just mixed with sugar, kind of like a pudding. We use that and put it in water with inputs, mix it all up, and then we wet the substrate that I'll explain to field capacity, like just like mushroom cultivation, because that's what we're trying to grow, really. So yeah, IMO2, water inputs, and then we use rice bran, crimped oats, and wood chips. That's super important. They need to be crimped oats, not like whole oats that you can get as like horse feed or something like that, or they'll sprout in the midst of you trying to make the pile. They're also kind of like crimped and busted open so everything can eat into them a little bit quicker. And yeah, I mean, rice bran and crimped oats can both be found at like animal feed supplies. Most of the time they are for horses. And then wood chips, it's even better if you have like aged wood chips, or maybe wood chips that already have some like mycelium growing through them, and you're just adding extra to the pile. So it's a 50-50 rice bran to crimped oats combo, and you match it by mass with wood chips. So the rice bran and crimped oats are by like weight. So you can just buy like a 40-pound bag of each, go 50-50, and then you match that by mass like visually with the wood chips. Then you moisten the pile until field capacity is achieved and the whole pile is evenly homogenized. So I have this like hay fork. It's got like 5 prongs on it. It's awesome. It's a lot easier to use in these types of things than like a shovel. But if that's all you got, you can make that work too. You're going to want to cover it. Once you get it mixed and the moisture is right, then you can make it into a pile probably like 8 to 10 inches tall, kind of no matter how big it is. You don't want to make it like super tall or it's going to get too hot in the middle. So I would start at like maybe 10 to 12 inches at the most. And you cover it with straw mulch or something else similar to achieve the 70-30 shade to sunlight ratio. So straw mulch is good. It also ends up kind of like working its way in because you can't always scrape all of it off. But it's a great option. That's what I used in this. You could use a tarp if it's really cold out. Just be careful because that can make it overheat. Um, IMO3 must be turned within the first 24 hours, and then you babysit the pile for at least 7 days, never allowing it to go over 120 by turning it as often as needed. So you use like a compost thermometer, or you can be crazy about it and get like a Bluetooth thermometer that you plug in, and it'll set an alarm off on your phone when it's getting too hot. Um, but you'll have to wake up in the middle of the night to make sure that this is not overheating. So it's literally babysitting the pile. Um, so the temp should rise, stay steady, and then slowly come back down as everything begins to dry out and sporulate. So the 120 is because over that we start to destroy fungi. If you let it get too hot over that by maybe 5 degrees and you catch it really quick and you get it all spread out and cool it off, you can probably save it, and you'll know by the smell. Um, but most of the time, if it gets too hot, then bacteria begin to take over, and then they're so voracious that they just outdo everything, and then your pile just turns to a sour smelling thing that's no good, which you can put in your compost pile, but I wouldn't use it in the garden at that point. At the beginning of this, it actually smells like baking bread. It's like, and it has like a yeasty, earthy smell. That's, yeah, kind of hard to describe, but once you get like the scent memory of it, if any of you can find a class on this, I'm going to be teaching one a little bit later this fall, probably in 3 or 4 weeks. I'm going to make an announcement on that note. I have a newsletter. If anyone after class wants to sign up there, you can stay on top of that type of thing. But yeah, once you get that scent memory, in your brainstem, then that's your meter on knowing where you're at. That's it. Yeah. This is the IMO3 recipe for 1 gallon of solution. So if you are making it with like bags of like horse feed, like I talked about, probably 40 to 50 pound bags each with the wood chips, you might use like 4 or 4.5 gallons of the solution to wet that. Maybe not that much, but I would prep that much in like a 5 gallon bucket. And yeah, so for 1 gallon of it, it's as you can see, eight milliliters of fermented plant juice. Same for brown rice vinegar. I don't make brown rice vinegar. That's the only input I don't make. I buy Marukin organic rice vinegar, which is brown rice vinegar, and everything that I use is organic ingredients as well on the things I prep. 4 milliliters of OHN, or Oriental Herbal Nutrient. That's like a plant medicine. You're probably all familiar with fire cider for us to keep us healthy. I mean, this is that for plants and us. And a funny thing about most, if not all, of the inputs that are made within natural farming is they are technically edible. I don't sell them as that. I'm not trying to get involved in needing like a food license or whatever, but some people do drink the OHN when they feel an illness coming on, very similar to fire cider and stuff. And I'll explain what's in that in a little bit. And then it's 1 to 30 seawater. So you can just make that ratio by going 4 grams of sea salt per gallon of fresh water. 8 milliliters of humic acid, and the IMO2 stirred in, which if you're using like a 4 gallon bucket, I would use like a large tablespoon of that stuff, just like a heaping. There's no real amount that would necessarily even be too much. It's just you want to have some for future piles and hang on to it. Okay, so IMO4 is taking that finished pile of substrate compost, really, which is just wood chips, rice bran, crimped oats, and that dries out, turns into a pile of spores, really. It's super dusty, but it's not dust, it's all spores. And then that's mixed 50-50 with your native soil or wherever you're growing. Then you repeat the same process. So you moisten it to field capacity. So yeah, first you would have your dried out pile. You'd go, I mean, even if I've just dug up like an area of my lawn to make this because that's the same soil that I knew I'd be planting into after everything got through the wood chips and mushroom soil I put on. I'll explain that how I set up the garden itself. But underneath is the soil that's in your lawn. So you could find an area you want to turn into a flower bed anyway or something like that, and just dig up maybe this far down. I wouldn't go much further because most of the microbes hang out towards the top anyway. So yeah, it's 50-50 IMO3 pile to your native soil, and that's like a visual mass thing. You don't need to try to find some giant scale. And then it's moistened, like I said, and then you babysit this the exact same way. So it can never go over 120. Um, Riding it out at 115, like if it slowly rises up, hits 115, stays there, and then starts to drop off as it starts to dry out, that's like a perfect pile, really. Um, and then you'll apply that after it's all done and dried out as a light top dressing in the evening so it doesn't get blasted by the sun right away. And then optimally, you top it with some type of mulch to achieve that 70-30 ratio. But yeah, this will go through basically the same smells where it'll smell kind of like baking bread, yeasts, and just rich earth, especially as it starts to dry out. This is the recipe for IMO4. Um, Very similar to the last one. It's just excluding the IMO2 this time. Mm-hmm. You can easily make it. If you don't want to, you can buy it from me. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll just explain for a minute. Plant juice. That is any super powerful plant that doesn't seem to care about where it's growing and is green all the time. So think like dandelions or something like that. I use comfrey a lot. If any of you are familiar with comfrey, that's a super powerful plant, and bugs don't mess with it much either. So think about the attributes of the plant that you'd want to apply to what you're growing, and also consider what I was just describing, to where it really doesn't need any help at all, and it's thriving on its own. And there's other plants right around it that don't look as good, like they're having a hard time, but it doesn't care. That's what you want. You want that energy, and those like growth hormones is what we're really pulling, auxins, um, and that is highest in the morning. So when you make FPJ, you're going to want to do it, I mean, as early as you can. And part of that is also it's the auxins being in the tips, which is the part that we're harvesting, the growth hormones, and the microbes that are on the dew. So there's some lactic acid bacteria in there and some other things that can add to the fermentation process of making fermented plant juice. And it's a quick process. You can have it in like a week. And it's very simple. It's just the plant by weight, chopped up into like little 1-inch pieces, and then massaged in with brown sugar. Then you put it in a jar 2/3 full with a breathable lid, pour off the juice in a week. Done. That's it. You can store it in the fridge for probably a year. I think I might have a slide on that, but I figured I would just go through it. So liquid IMO is like compost tea. Chris Trump came up with this. This was not like an original idea from Master Cho, but I mean, it's awesome. You can take that pile that you made and take like a handful of it and put it into a compost brewer with these ingredients. And if you do it for 36 hours at 73 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, then it would just be less time. You'll get the same type of smells coming off the brewer, like yeast, and you've woken up a lot of the things through doing that. Then you can spray that everywhere. So it's a matter of like extending what you have even more. Like a handful of this giant pile could go into a 10-gallon brewer or something like that, and then that could be applied to your whole field just from spraying. And you were doing the same thing by spraying out the microbes that then get into the soil and reawaken and spread and multiply. So the only downside, I think, of liquid IMO is a bottlenecking of microbes that are more willing to survive in like a vortex of water or just an aerated water tank versus them growing out and them just drying out into the pile and you applying them directly. So probably not missing out on much, but something to consider. This picture is from a few years ago, but that's my daughter. She's 6 now. But establishing a garden. So grass and weeds need to be choked out by wood chips or compost or cardboard or tarps. But I would not encourage anyone to buy a tarp to put on their soil. Most of the time they start to break down. I think even if they look like they aren't, you're probably getting microplastics into your soil, and then good luck ever getting that out. So I also wouldn't want anybody to support and buy a giant plastic maker just for this. But if you have a tarp lying around and that's what you want to do, I've done it in the past. I just have figured out other ways since then. I don't think there's anything like wrong with it if you already have it. If you're like recycling it basically, or you have it on your property in some way. If you want to, okay, so I'll talk about the tarps in a sec. But tilling is an option as well to get started, or to quickly restart an area. But tilling disturbs the soil biology that we are nurturing, so it should be avoided when possible. So I'm sure everybody's seen like fields where farmers are growing corn and they till it every year, and everything just looks like a light tan and dead. That's literally what it is. That's dirt. That's not really soil at that point because it's lacking like the microbes. So tilling in general is to be avoided because you disturb the mycelial network that we're trying so hard to get in there and then take care of. Tarps can take 3+ months of summer sun to kill everything. Not great because of the plastic on soil, but use what you have. Don't buy it for this purpose. You can also just use wood chips at 4+ inches and then compost at 6+ inches on top of that to just start even right out there, just in the yard. You could lay down 4 inches of wood chips, 6 inches of compost, plant right into it. Weeds aren't going to pop up. If some do, it's pretty minimal. And then that amount of compost would allow you to get a first crop going. And then by the time it gets big enough, things start to break down underneath, and you're good to go. The second year will obviously be healthier because everything will be more incorporated. There's not weeds underneath in the process of dying, so it's just all straight soil. But the whole thing becomes a giant mycelium-infused sponge that makes irrigation unnecessary in my experience. So I don't water my garden at all. At the beginning of the season, I did water some of the starts for a little bit because we had like a dry spell. But past that, it's all technically like dry farming, it's called now. And yeah, it's going great this year. I have irrigated in the past, but this year I have hemp planted and I haven't had to water it at all, and they're doing awesome. So IMO 2, IMO 3. So IMO 2 is the pudding stuff. You could just mix that into water and apply it. IMO 3 is the substrate that hasn't been married to your soil, but you could still apply it. IMO 4 is that married pile. And then something called IMO 5 is another step where you would take the IMO 4 and mix it with manure. So that in of itself is another kind of like bottleneck like I was describing. because there's certain things that don't want to live in that, but do happily go into that substrate and then into your local soil. But that IMO5 is like a superior nitrogen fertilizer because it's not just manure. I mean, it's manure that's been infused with microbes and broken down a bit. So gardening indoors can also be jump started by using IMOs. IMO 3 or 4 can be top dressed prior to the mulch layer when setting up a bed. You can also spray liquid IMO into an amended soil mix that'll cook for a week or two before being used. So just like compost where you wouldn't want to let it get too hot. IMO 3 and 4 can be mixed in directly in small amounts if you're making a soil mix for a bed or a big pot or something like that. But small amounts, you don't want to overdo it. And then, like I mentioned, the IMO 2 can just be mixed into water and watered right in. Always use a mulch layer inside or outside. And then just another idea is to incorporate Garden Giant into your gardens, which is a type of mushroom. I'm blanking on what else it's called. Yes, thank you. But these are pretty easily findable from different people that sell like mushroom spawn bags and things like that. And they're edible. So I've gotten mine from my buddy Drew at Uncle Fungus. I'm not sure if he has any in stock right now, but check him out regardless. And I've gotten some from Will at Mycosymbiotics, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but he does a lot of awesome stuff. This is a first year garden, like I was describing. Um, this was all just a yard, basically a few months prior. So it's just wood chips, 4 or 5 inches, something like that. And then 6+ inches of mushroom compost is what I got from a local like landscape company. If you can somehow source an organic mushroom compost or make your own, if you know like an organic mushroom farm in your area, that would be the dream. But yeah, I mean, this was done with starts that I started indoors and then planted in there. But yeah, that's a first year garden, which I did not used to think was possible. This is yeah, like watermelon growing in with some flowers, and this is a picture of the starts that went in. Yeah, like 6+ inches. Yeah, I mean, it's like building a row of just the wood chips at first. That's like that, and then kind of like layer on top the mushroom soil, and then it's just more wood chips in the walkways. So that's how you end up with like a mat eventually, where everything is connected underneath and can retain more water and transport nutrients. That's the mycelial network that we're trying to build, is for that reason too. This is my small company, Conscious Natural Inputs, formed to help people get a jump start on natural farming. It's open source, so if I advertise something on my Instagram, like this is in my store, I'm like, and this is how you can make it. And if someone can't or just doesn't want to, or wants to see how I do it, I guess compared to them or something like that, that's I think where my sales come from. But a lot of them go to cannabis farmers around the nation. Cannabis growers have gotten into natural farming because it's an obvious difference in the end product. It's also an obvious difference in the end product of like vegetables and stuff like that. But cannabis smokers are very particular, so I think we've latched on first. Um, yeah, all organic ingredients with love and intention, like I mentioned earlier. Um, if I'm not in a good mood or something, I won't work with my inputs, just like I won't work with my plants. So I'm always intentional whenever I'm stepping into that type of work. And it's focused on inputs since they are not region specific, whereas IMO is. That's what I was talking about. Trying to collect right around your house. I wouldn't want to sell um, a baggie of my IMO 4 pile that's like married with my soil and uh, the area right around me to someone that lives in like Arizona, because it might help them for like a week or two or some unknown amount of time, but a lot of the intelligence and microbes are going to die off because they're not like acclimated to that area. So that's, yeah, you're better off getting that yourself. And if you don't want to make the inputs, I can help you out. I have an Instagram, which is just conscious natural inputs. I think there's like an underscore between each word. And I have a bunch of info on there too. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the inputs. OHN is like the fire cider for plants, basically, I was saying. Plant medicine. It can ward off pathogens. It can deter bugs. But the main thing we're trying to do in general with this is to increase the health of the plants to the degree that they have their natural resistances up. So they have aspects of themselves that when they're truly happy can fight off bugs. So there is some crossover where like there's a bunch of garlic in the OHN, so yeah, a bunch of bugs don't like the smell of that. But what we're trying to do is increase the health of everything to the point that it is resilient. So OHN is a fermentation and then tincture of herbs like angelica, cinnamon, licorice, garlic, and ginger. So that's like a 3+ month process. That's the longest one out of there, other than the fish amino acid. Everything else you see there can be done in like a week or 2 weeks at the most. So if anybody likes making tinctures or things like that, OHN is a fun one to do. You can make a bunch at once and then have it for years. It gets better as time goes on. Actually, after I think like 4 years or so, you can cut the dosage in half, just I guess from everything micronizing a bit over time. But yeah, I would encourage people to make that. If you don't want to make that, that is one I sell more of. I think just because it takes a longer time for people to make. And the latest batch I made is 100% organic, where I was able to source um, like organic vodka, basically, is what I turned it into. But it was a higher strength. I cut it down to the 40% because that's part of the recipe. So FPJ is what I was explaining earlier, where we're going out in the morning and cutting the plant tips of vigorous growing plants, and as soon as possible, cutting that up into 1 inch pieces. Not, you don't need to pulverize it, and then massaging that in with sugar. That ferments for a week in a breathable lid, and then you get the juice out of that. But you don't, when you're getting the juice out, don't like try to squeeze it out. I would just kind of let it pour out. Brown rice vinegar, it's not that hard to make, I guess. I've not dove into that. I mean, vinegars in general are not that hard to make. You can make them with your leftovers, actually. So if you make fermented plant juice with dandelion leaves or something, you could, after you strain the juice out, add some water back into that and then let it sit, and you could get like a dandelion leaf vinegar that you could use as part of these recipes as well instead of the brown rice vinegar. It's just, yeah, with natural farming, there's a lot of like technicalities, and apparently brown rice vinegar is the best. So that's what I use. But fermented fruit juice is the same process as the fermented plant juice, to where you're mixing an overripe fruit with brown sugar at an equal weight. You massage it in, and then you put it 2/3 full in a vessel of some kind with a breathable lid for a week, like 7 to 9 days. That is used to encourage plants to basically finish up. So I think people sometimes overuse it, trying to like think that they can sweeten up their plants a lot by adding this, or like cannabis growers will like make a watermelon fermented fruit juice and like apply it towards the end of flowering, thinking they can get their plant to taste like watermelon. I don't. It doesn't work like that really. It's really meant to help encourage plants finish up. So if you have like an early winter coming, or some crazy storm that's coming in a few days, and like some of your tomatoes are almost ripe, you could apply this as a foliar, and get them to finish up, because you're applying those enzymes and those, I guess, growth hormones that are within the super ripe fruit to the plant, and it triggers it to finish up a little bit quicker. FAA is fish amino acid. This is a nitrogen rich input. It's awesome. I'd say if you're going to use a few of these to try to get started, I would try to get OHN, a fermented plant juice, get your vinegar, and then get FAA, or make all these is what I'm getting at. But FAA takes 3+ months to be usable. It's really okay at 6 months, and it's best at a year plus of fermentation. You make this by getting like fish heads and tails and spines and guts. Basically, you can get it from maybe a local butcher or a local like fish place if they're willing to give it up, if they're not using it for soup or something. But we're focused on using like the waste. We don't want to like put whole fish in there. I wouldn't. It'd be a bummer if someone like put fillets in there. Um, but you mix that. You put it in like a any type of vessel. I've done it in like a small jar, or you can do it in like a trash can. I've done both. And you layer that in there with the brown sugar. You mix it as much as you can, but like that's pretty hard to mix when it's that type of stuff. So you kind of layer it in there with brown sugar by weight. You also include some IMO4 if you have it, because that helps with the smell and it helps eat some of the fats that are forming at the top, and it can just help the fermentation in general. Then you just cap it, and that sits for like a year. And then the juice that you strain off that is, I mean, it smells and kind of tastes like soy sauce, fish sauce. It smells totally edible by the time it's done. And it goes in as like raw fish heads and tails and guts and stuff. It's crazy. WCA is water soluble calcium. You can make this with eggshells if you have chickens. You can also make it with like oyster shells. But to make it with eggshells, you would crush them up and toast them. I would not do it in your oven though, because it smells very sulfuric. It's gross. So do it outside on like a grill or something with a cast iron pan is what I use, and then you stir it and keep an eye on it so it doesn't get too hot. When they're done, they'll look like toasted marshmallows. A little white, a little brown on them. That's what you're shooting for. And then that goes into brown rice vinegar. I think it's a 1 to 10 ratio. Double check on my Instagram. It's been a little while since I've made that one. But yeah, you fill it like 1/10 of the way up in your container, and then top it off up to, I would say 2/3 full with that. But the reason for the 2/3 with this is because it expands. There's like a reaction that happens when the vinegar hits the eggshells, and it like foams up and they like dance around in there. It looks like a lava lamp or something for like a few hours. So, and the same happens with the oyster shells. It's a conversion to like calcium acetate that's happening. I'm not sure beyond that. Um, WCAP is water soluble calcium phosphate. Same process I was just describing with the vinegar, but this is done with charred bones. Um, Large animal bones is the way to go. So pigs, cows, goats, deer, elk, these types of things. You can't use fish bones for this, and you can't use bird bones because they're hollow. So we're trying to use, like large animal bones. I You can cook them on like a grill outside. Again, this smells horrible too. Burning bones is not good. But you can cook it on a grill. I get away with it with a Dutch oven, like a cast iron Dutch oven. I put them all in there. I put the lid on. I set that on my grill and I walk away because it smells terrible. Um, and then most of the time I have to come back and like reignite it and do the burn twice after like turning them around on the inside. But when they're done, they're like brittle. They sound like glass. They're just fully black all the way through like charcoal, but it's bone char. So then you do the same process. You can kind of crush them up a little bit, fill your jar or whatever vessel you want to use up 1/10 of the way with that. Top it off with vinegar. It dances around. There's a reaction. It's not as intense, but there's a bunch of bubbles that come off of it, and it fizzes for a bit. Um, yeah, let that sit like 7 to 10 days, 2 weeks at the max, but not necessary. And then there you go. That's your calcium phosphate. You can use that for plants that are transitioning from a vegetative state into a reproductive state, whether that's making fruit or flowers. It can encourage them in that transition and take away some of the stress from that transition. WSK is water soluble potassium. You can make this input with asparagus greens, like the frilly tops at the top. I think even more accessible is sunflower stalks. You can also use tobacco stalks. So when I make it, it's typically tobacco and sunflower stalks. And you do the same thing where you char it. And this one's way easier to do in a Dutch oven, like I was describing, because if you try to like cook these things, they're going to want to burn right away. Um, so yeah, you make a char out of those, and then you put this in water, and you let it sit for 10 to 12 days, and that can be used. I mean, it depends on, I guess, the crop that you're growing, but a lot of the time later whenever it's forming fruit, but you can use that anytime at a lower rate too. LAB is lactic acid bacteria. This is a really good one. There's a lot of uses for lactic acid bacteria. Um, you can help get rid of powdery mildew with it. You can add it to the soil to help things break down that maybe you've applied as a top dressing. You can add it to a compost pile. You can spray it on things that smell bad, like a chicken run, and the bacteria breaks down the odor and can start to break things down. We had an idea of like talking to the city of New York and seeing if we could get them to spray LAB in the subways to try to help with that. We'll see. Um, but yeah, you make this by collecting the lactic acid bacteria out of the air with like a rice wash. So you know when you cook rice, you like wash it with water. I use like a whisk. So if I'm just cooking rice and I think about it, I'm like, all right, let me actually save this instead of just dump it down the drain. So you whisk it for a while, and then you strain that off. Make sure you don't get any rice in there. You pour that into a container of some kind that has a bunch of surface area. So think like a baking pan, like one of those glass casserole dishes or something is what I use sometimes, or you could just use a bowl. And you sit that outside optimally or near a window for, I would say, like 3 or 4 days, and cover it with a paper towel so that you don't get bugs in there either. And check on it each day. You'll notice the smell change from just kind of smelling like rice, and it'll get a little bit of a sweet smell. And as that, like when that happens, you know you're good to go. So then that gets poured into milk at that point. You can use expired milk. That's fine. Um, and I think it's the 1 to 10 ratio with that too. So 1 part rice wash water that's been fermented a little bit out to 10 parts milk, and it'll take over the course of 5 or 6 days. You'll want to put that in a container, like I was saying, that's 2/3 full. Put those two things together and mix it up. And then it'll take over, and you'll get all these curds that form at the top, which you can actually use for cheese. If you collect it at the right time and it's not starting to decay at all, it's actually good. If you let it go too far, it gets a little stinky. You can still like feed it to your dog, or chickens like go crazy over it. And the serum that's on the bottom, that yellowish clear serum that is the whey, is what we're going after. That's the lactic acid bacteria serum. So you can just use it at that point, or you can actually take that and mix it with sugar to make it more shelf-stable at room temp. HWA is a herbal wetting agent. That's like a homemade liquid soap that I make that can be used to deter pests. It can like kill soft-bodied insects, and it can help some of the inputs stick a little bit better. It's not a vital thing. It's kind of it's an extra. And humic acid is like a carbon-based input. I don't make anything like that, but it in itself smells like rich forest floor. And you can find it powderized, or you can find it, like a dark brown liquid. It makes all these things more available. So don't overdo it if you're like watering it in. I don't think it's necessary to foliar feed humic. It's really more of a soil thing, and it is used in the pile making process. So it's part of the solution that goes in. And then seawater, as like I described earlier, 4 grams per gallon of water gets you the ratio of seawater that we're going for in these concoctions. But real seawater would be even better because there's more microbes in there too. And if you have an ocean near you, I would collect it fresh, or a couple days from when you want to use it. And you're supposed to get it from like the brackish water, where it's all like sudsy and stuff from hitting rocks if you can. Okay. Questions, anybody? It's a lot of info.
Weird question or comment about seawater.
Yeah.
There's a product called Sea Agri. I forget what it's actually called, but it's dried up ocean water, like 20 miles out.
Awesome.
So it has all 92, well, 90 out of 92 plant elements in it.
Okay.
It looks like salt.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks it's just sea salt. Farmers avoid it, even though they regularly use like salt.
Right.
But I was wondering if you could use that, because it is seawater, it's just dried up.
Yeah, I use something called C90.
Oh, that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it's the same thing.
Products.
That's what I think the best thing to use when you're making your own seawater, like
Okay.
yeah, seawater technically. Yeah.
Yeah, we got some.
Yeah, you can use
Only
that.
supplier is in Lancaster. They buy it. I don't know if it's far.
I've just ordered it online in the past,
There's
but
one called White Oak Mills. It's Western Lancaster.
okay.
Somebody has it as like a horse supplement.
A horse supplement. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like a big bag of it.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Would aquarium salt work? Not like for like actual saltwater tanks, but I use like aquarium salt for brackish water tanks,
Okay.
which are usually planted. So I would think that would kind of work the same way.
Yeah, I think basically any sea salt is what we're going for in general. You don't want to use like that iodized salt. I think that's really the only thing to avoid. You could even use like Himalayan pink salt if you want, but I think that something like C90 is even better. Anybody else? Yes. Her first, yeah. Yeah. Yes. I have. What's up? Upload what? Oh yeah. I mean, I'll have this lecture up on YouTube. I'm also in the process of making like a course on for online, and then I do in-person intro classes at the farm every once in a while. So yeah, if you sign up there, I'll make sure you hear about it. Yeah. You have a question?
I was just going to ask about green natural farming, because I've seen some of Chris Jump's videos, and they're really long, and I just don't have time to get into it. So I'm like glad that you came and explained it all really nicely.
Awesome.
But what are other aspects of natural farming other than IMO? I mean, without it being a big topic, what are
distinctive qualities of it. I would say the amount of love and intention that goes into it is pretty extreme compared to some other things, because you're making all these things and you're putting that into it the whole time. And I mean, I've personally just seen more resilience and health in my plants doing it this way than any other way prior. And there's a huge connection. I think that's the biggest thing. Like the connection that you have to what you're growing because of what I said earlier, like the intention you've put into it and the attention you're giving them at different times of their life is is pretty distinctive for me with natural farming. Yeah. Yeah. I'm in Gettysburg, yeah. Okay. Awesome. Is that it? Yep. In Idaho at his in-person class. Yeah. Which is super valuable. That's why as part of that intro class, I'll have like an IMO pile already constructed and started so you can smell it. As long as I do it right before class. There are failures associated with this stuff. It happens. So my plan is to have one already cooking so everyone can smell what it's supposed to smell like, which was one of my biggest takeaways from that class. Because like I was describing, like I don't know if you're all familiar, but our smells are like attached to like our brain stem or something like that. It's super attached to memory more than any other sense like that. So kind of once you get that logged in, you'll have that as your meter moving forward. You could get away with making piles without a thermometer at all, really, by using your hands. As long as it's not burning you, you're good to go. If it's starting to feel too hot, you need to turn it. So you could monitor the whole thing like instinctually, really, or intuitively. Yeah.
This is just me admitting that I'm lazy, but there's like a lot of steps here. So I enjoyed the kind of first step where you take, I think it was like IMO 1 or 2, and then water. Like,
Yeah.
so do you think that's valuable? I mean,
Absolutely.
I know it's the lazy way out, and there's so much more, but I need to do it quick or I'm not going to do anything else.
No, I think that's a great way to go. I mean, you're actually not bottlenecking it at all at that point. So, yeah, you'd have more bacteria than not more bacteria than fungi, but like as you take the IMO2 and put it in the pile and you babysit it just surrounding conditions that are ideal to fungi, you start to swing it towards being almost entirely fungi as you take it further down the process. So, but a lot of those bacteria are super beneficial to soil too. And you're not really missing out on much, I guess, especially compared to like the amount of effort it takes to get to the other steps. Like I would encourage you to do that.
Really, I'm like a suburban garden. I don't have a huge amount of land.
Uh-huh.
And I think it really resonated when you said the difference between dirt and soil. I'm like, oh my God, I think I have dirt. Is this my problem? It's
Could be. It could just be, yeah, a lack of life in the soil. And you might already have enough like nitrogen and phosphorus and everything else that you need in there. It might be sitting there but inaccessible to the plants because of the lack of microbes. Yeah. I mean, you can make that even better by adding some compost on top, which, if it's well-made compost, you're getting some of the benefit that we're talking about from the microbes that come in there. And I'll give you another quick idea. I'm blanking on what it's called right now for some reason. Hopefully it comes to me. But you can make a preparation similar to this in like 24 to 36 hours. You just fill up a container with water. You cook a potato. So the potato is kind of acting like the carb or the food source. So you make like a soft boiled potato to where you can like mush it up a little bit or a lot of it. So you get that potato, you put it in like an old sock or something like that, you know. But a sock's really easy because you put it in there, especially if it's a long one. You put a stick over your water container so that you can tie the sock on that and it's suspended in the water. You mush the potato like out of the sock for the most part and stir it up a little bit and have a second sock or like a mesh bag or something that is also suspended right beside it, and in that is just some forest duff. Like you find an area that's like fungal rich, like we're gonna go try to find. You pick up a handful of that, you put it in your like mesh bag or like a compost bag you could find, or just use a sock. Yeah, and you have those two things suspended in a bucket with just a stick over the top. And then cover that with like a plastic bag or just something that you can kind of cover it to let it heat up a little bit. Check up on it every like, I mean, it'll take at least like 12 or 24 hours to do much. So don't feel like you need to check up on it all the time. But you'll see bubbles start to form around the ring. And as soon as they begin to like separate from the edge a little bit, or just when you have a bunch around the edge, um, water it in. But actually cut it back. Like don't use that straight. You can, but you can make it go way further by like maybe 1 to 4 or even less. Yeah, that one's really easy. Just make sure you farm yourself first.
And I do, I garden angry.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Okay. Hey, that works too.
I don't know if I'm putting the anger into the
I think as long as you're not putting it directly into them, I think you're probably fine.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah. Anybody else? All right. Okay, let's go for a walk in the woods. I don't know if you want to chill for a couple minutes and then go. If anyone wants to go, I'll be outside in like 5 minutes. And I have the newsletter here.